going to talk about grid references today. So grid references are a standardized way of communicating a position. We mentioned during the discussion about maps how Ireland is busy mapped out on the Irish grid, and it divides the island of Ireland into 25 equal 100 kilometre by 100 kilometre squares. So we need to have the first part of the grid reference is going to be that letter, which happens to be J, or Juliet, for the Mournes. Obviously, a 100 kilometre square is quite a big area to find someone in, so we're going to divide that up into smaller squares. So we're going to divide the 100 kilometres into separate 1 kilometre squares. And these are numbered basically starting from the bottom left at 0, 0. I'll go increasing up to 99, and then you're into a separate letter square, and then it's same here going up the way, so going from south to north, going from 0 up to 99, when we'll go on to a separate number square again. So I'm going to assume for the purposes of this that we are in the Mournes, so the first part of my grid reference is going to be J. We're then going to identify the 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre square that the feature we're looking for is located in. And I always remember that we go along the corridor and then up the stairs, and that's just a standardized way of handing over your grid reference. So if we take, for example, this little stream junction here, so we've got 2 blue lines running in, so blue lines are typically water features on the map. So we're looking for this little stream junction here, so I'm going to go along the corridor, so we're going from 32, 33, 34, so we're in this little line here, and then we're going to go up the stairs. So I'm going to go from 0, 1 up to 0, 2. So my grid reference to 4 figures is going to be J, 3, 4, 0, 2. That gives us the 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre square that feature that we're interested in is in. Obviously that's still quite a big area, and there may be several features that are described the same way, so there might be more than one river junction in that 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre square, so we need to make it more accurate. So we're going to go for a 6-figure grid reference, which will bring us to an accuracy of 100 metres by 100 metres. So we're going to imagine that we have divided our one big square, so 1 kilometre square, into smaller 100 metre squares. Of course there'll be 100 of those in each of those. So you can see it's a much smaller unit that we're looking at to try and identify the location that we're at. So coming back to our feature, it's always a good idea to try and estimate what you think the grid reference is going to be, and that just means that if you measure it and it's widely out, that you're going to double check it. So in this example, we know that we're in square J, so that's the 100 kilometre by 100 kilometre square, and we identified that we're in this square here, so J3402, so along the corridor and up the stairs. If I go along the corridor in this square, then I'm going to estimate that we are going to be about 4/10 of the way across this square, so that'll give us a grid reference of 344 for this component, and it looks like we're about halfway up, so about 5 little squares up into this one, so my grid reference for this part of it will be 025. So I'm going to estimate that my grid reference will be J344025. I'll write that down and we'll measure it in a second just to see how accurate I've been. So J344025. So on our compass we have, which is essentially a fancy ruler that we call a roamer. So on this compass we've got roamers for 1 to 25k, so 1 to 25,000 scale map, which is the one that will be commonly used in the Mournes. 1 to 50,000, which is commonly used around the world, and then 1 to 40,000, which is sometimes used in another company called Harvey. And again, they produce a map of the Mournes that I'll bring along on the course so that you can see it. They just cover different aspects of what we'd use a map for. It's important that we use the right measurement or right ruler or right roamer for the scale of the map that we're going to use. So in this case, I printed these squares out at 4 centimeters by 4 centimeters, which represents a 1 to 25,000 map. We are going to use this corner of the roamer to locate the feature that we're interested in on our map. We've already identified that we're interested in this square here, so J3402. I'm going to start off with the corner of the roamer in the bottom left hand corner of the square. And again, we are going to go along the corridor. So you can see I'm extending along here, and then I'm going to go up the stairs. We're going to keep these aligned so that we're square with the scale of the roamer and the grid lines on the map. So it looks fairly square to me, and we are not going to round up, we're going to round down. So we can see here that we're not quite reaching the number 5 in this case, so our 6-figure grid reference is going to be J344. And then whenever we look up the way, we can see we are not quite reaching the 6. So that is going to give us 0 to 5. So you can see that our estimate of the grid reference was accurate in this case, but if it was wildly different, then we would want to go and remeasure again. Next, I'm going to identify the grid reference for this blue triangle with a dot in the middle, which represents a triangulation post, which is used as a static point for measuring things whenever you're mapping an area. Again, we want to identify what our 4-figure grid reference is going to be to start with. We're still in the same area, which is the Mournes. So it's important that we use the letter J to represent that 100 kilometer by 100 kilometer square that we talked about previously. Again, we're going to go along the stairs, so J32, 33, 34, 35. So that's going to identify this bottom left part of the square. Then we're going to go up the stairs, so 01, 02. So the 4-figure grid reference, which is going to identify this 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer square, will be J3502. We want to make it more accurate than that and get down to a 6-figure grid reference. again, I'm going to estimate what I think the grid reference is going to be. So in this case, J35, I would say this is about 7/10 of the way across, so 7 increments across. So J357, and I'd say it is probably between 7 and 8 little subdivisions going up the way, which will give us 0 to 7. I'm going to measure it to the bottom left hand part of the symbol. So using my ruler again, I'm basically going to start in the bottom left hand corner, and I'm going to keep this nice and parallel with the grid lines. So we'll go to the bottom left hand corner here, keeping that parallel with the grid lines. We can see that we are not quite hitting the 8 in this case, so J357, and again not quite hitting the 8 again on the roamer, which is going to give us 0 to 7. So again, fortunately, I seem to have estimated the grid reference accurately. So we're going to look at identifying the grid reference to 6 figures for this corner of wall. So again, we're going to assume that we are in the Mournes, so we're going to start off with J as the first component of our grid reference. Again, we're going to estimate, so going along the corridor, so 3, 2, 3, 3, 3, 4, 3, 5. Because remember, we're trying to identify this bottom left hand part of the square. So J, 3, 5. Now we're going to go up the stairs. So 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. I'm going to estimate that this is 4 little increments across. So J, 3, 5, 4. And probably about the same going up the way, so it's going to be 0, 3, 4 as our estimate. So now we're going to measure this more accurately. So again, we're going to start in the bottom left hand corner of the square. We're going to go along the corridor and then up the stairs again. So going along the corridor, we are going to be at J35. Looks like we're just hitting the 5 here, so J355, then going up the stairs is going to be 035 again. So you can see in this case, this was the 4-figure grid reference, this was the estimate, and this is what it was when we measured it. So you can see that we were a little bit out, or should I say I was a little bit out with my estimate, but whenever I measured it, it wasn't a million miles away, so I knew you hadn't made a significant error, for example like reversing these 2 numbers round, which is very easy to do. So putting that into context, this is a fictitious map of the Mournes. As you can see, there's 2 sleeve cometas, which is not the case in real life, and the geography's rather different to reality, but I think it's useful to use a map with lots of symbols and things on it, just so you can see what this looks like in real life. So again, we're going to say we're in the Mournes, so for the 100 kilometre by 100 kilometre, it's going to be letter J. And we're going to go into this wall. So in the Mournes there actually is a big wall that runs over the tops of lots of the mountains. We'll talk about that on the course, but we see we've got a little basically change of direction in the wall, so a little corner here. So we're going to estimate what the grid reference is going to be for this. So looking at our 4-figure grid reference, we can see we're going to go along the corridor, so 3, 1, 3233 before going up the stairs, and it's this bottom left hand corner of the square that we want. So looking at this, we're going to be J3204. I'm going to estimate what we think our grid reference is going to be then. So if we're going along the corridor before going up the stairs, it looks like we're going to be J327 possibly, and then we may be one increment going up, but we might not quite reach that. So I'm going to say that we do, which is going to be 04 going up. It's going to be 041. So that is our estimated 6-figure grid reference for the corner of the wall. I'm going to measure it more accurately by bringing in the roamer again. We are going to put the bottom left hand corner, sorry, the top right hand corner of the roamer on the bottom left hand corner of the square that we're interested in. I'm going to go along the corridor. I can see that we are getting to the little 8 increment. So it's going to be J328. Now we're going to go up the stairs, and we're not quite reaching the 1. So because we haven't reached the 1, we don't count it. So it's going to be 040. So our 6-figure grid reference for here is going to be J32804. Doesn't quite reach the 1, so 040. So J328040.